Good morning, everyone.
Morning. Morning.
Morning, Robert. Morning,
Good morning.
Denise.
Good morning.
Sitting looking at my cup, saying, "Did I really have that second cup of coffee? It doesn't feel like it yet." But you're Pacific time too, Michael, right? So
yeah, I am on my second cup.
Okay.
Hopefully it'll kick in soon.
I lost count.
Oh, there you go.
Oh. We're going to have a lot of wet weather up here next couple of days.
Mhm.
5 inches, they say.
Wow. Well, don't you guys need it though up there with all the
Oh.
wildfires and everything?
Oh yeah, we're got the whole state's drought just like everybody else in the West Coast. So yeah, we'll be good.
I don't think in California we've built a reservoir since I remember when I was 18 years old, and there was a big, huge, expensive bill for building more water retention. And I thought, finally, and I voted for it, and nothing ever got built.
Mhm.
I was a naive first-time voter.
Good morning, Phil.
Good morning. How y'all doing?
Good to see you.
Good to see you guys.
Looks like you're out with the corral with the horses and everything this morning, Phil.
Oh yeah. I didn't change my background. That's actually a O-scale model railroad module I built.
Oh, there
Really?
you go. That's awesome.
It's
That's
actually
amazing detail.
Yeah.
It's actually a 2x4 foot module taken outside in my driveway and photographed against the hills in the background. So
That's
that
very
That's
cool.
awesome.
yeah, it actually looks even cooler in person, quite frankly.
It's a huge tree up against that train. The engine.
Phil Edholm, are you still alive? Holy crap.
Yeah.
Are you? Mark Fletcher gets on the phone and asks if other people are still alive.
yeah. That
I'm
proposed
sorry,
everybody.
wasn't sure whether I should go there, but I mean that's. How are
What
you?
happens
How are
when you
you?
see people in
Fletch?
person?
Good.
Oh,
I didn't see Phil on the other side when I was there, so I expected him to be here.
Well, you know what's amazing? This is a historic day. This is a really historic day, guys. You realize that? Does anybody know why this is a really historic day? We'll all remember. Right? You're going to remember November 10th, 2021 as the end of an era. What happened today? Mitel exited the business.
Yeah.
Avaya exited the business. Atos exited the business. Now Mitel's exited the business. They've all sold their user bases to Ring Central. This was the end of it today. Every major large telecom company except Cisco has now sold their install bases to Ring Central.
Wow.
It's an interesting thought process, guys. This is a day you guys will remember for the rest of your lives, because this is the day your previous life ended. Because the days of selling telecoms consulting services are really numbered. Because in the cloud, it's different.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's part of why we're having this conversation today. But it was really apropos that I woke up this morning and got that email from Mitel, because I heard it yesterday and got the email that they're going to talk to us about it today. So,
Phil, you're amazing. Unbelievable.
What? It's just been, the dominoes have just been falling. Now the interesting question is, I understood Avaya, I understood Atos, I understood Alcatel-Lucent. I don't understand Mitel. So what does Mitel do after they sell their user base?
This is Mark from VoIP Networks. I'm not sure if Dave is going to be talking from Mitel today. Not sure, Steve, if that was lined up, but
No, we'll have him on a future one.
They have a call scheduled at 12 at 1:30 Eastern time, so 10:30, so half an hour after this. And I'm sure there's no problem with giving the link out to folks who want to go. Because like I said, I'm really curious just to know, because I understood Avaya is going to focus on customer experience. Clearly Alcatel-Lucent's got lots of other stuff. Atos has lots of other stuff to focus on. But the question I really wanted to understand is, other than communication platforms, what is Mitel going to do?
sure. I mean, I could tell you from my perspective. I mean, our company, we're an exclusive Mitel dealer. We've been for, oh God, over 20 some years exclusive Mitel. So I mean, I do have somewhat of an inside track. I mean, everyone was kind of caught off guard, but honestly, from me talking to some of the senior folks at Mitel, it's actually good for us. You got to remember when Mitel was Mitel, right? They had their core product lines and they did really well with it. And then they went on an acquisition frenzy. And then one of the biggest acquisitions they did was SureTel. And when they bought SureTel specifically for that M5 product, which then turned into SureTel Sky, which then turned into My Voice Connect. So how I've always viewed Mitel is, as they were growing and getting so much larger, they've always kind of were like split in the middle. They had a UCaaS product that they acquired from SureTel, now labeled and called My Voice Connect. And that was their go-to-market, very quick, me too, shared instance UCaaS offering, and they did very, very well with it. Equally, they were running, and we call that the orange side because SureTel's colors were traditionally orange, and Mitel's corporate colors were typically blue, and it was always like the blue versus the orange. When the My Voice Connect, which was designed for small to medium-sized companies, didn't fit the mold for a mid to enterprise customer, that's where the legacy blue came in. So Mitel's not doing away with the legacy blue at all. I mean, that's what we're hearing, at least. In fact, if anything, we're more empowered now because what we sell is just their enterprise base, their core Mitel products that can be virtualized, that can be run in a cloud environment, can be run in an industry standard server environment, et cetera. So those who listen to my fireside chat. So no, Mitel's not getting out of the industry. Mitel's kind of focusing on what I think they were great at. And I'm kind of glad it happened because from my perspective, they were split. It was almost like dealing with two companies. And, it almost seemed like a lot of the UC was
So you
was
went
getting,
from something that was almost like dealing with two companies to dealing with two companies.
No, now we're dealing with one company in my regards. I mean, honestly, if we were selling the Connect product, yeah, that looks like that's more going towards a Ring Central type partnership arrangement. Again, I'm just going off of what I'm reading and just.
But it's curious. Anyway, it's probably not the conversation for this morning.
Hey,
I
Phil,
know it was. Yeah.
Phil, I think you got invited to a webinar at 1:30.
Yeah, I did. And that was just my question was, I understood Avaya, I understood Atos, I understood Alcatel-Lucent. I don't quite understand with Mitel where the company ends up.
Right perspective.
Yeah.
Dave, are you going to speak to that today, or you want to wait till the, I guess, the formal announcement?
Did you get your fork and knife? Yeah.
Yeah, the formal invite went out to all the consultants for a webinar at 1:30 today.
Okay.
Where the VP of product development will talk through it. Just got off of a town hall with all the employees, and we'll talk through it. But yeah, it is, Phil, it is a little bit more unique than what the other two did, and we'll explain that as we go through it, not to steal airtime from my colleagues here.
Cool.
So, but Phil, what's your point about, Ring Central now taking on, ownership of all these databases, or, at least influencing?
Well, it's clear that all of the existing telecom providers, with the exception of Cisco, have decided they can't compete in the true multi-user, multi-tenant cloud, and have decided to OEM a platform in the market.
Wow.
I mean, what other conclusion can you come to?
Right.
Basically Avaya started, and, by the way, I wrote a couple articles when Avaya did it. And I said, I thought it was brilliant. I actually tried hard to get Avaya to sell the IP office business to Mitel back a few years ago. And then they came up with this great solution to sell it one seat at a time, essentially sell it one seat at a time to Ring Central, which let them keep the install base and milk the install base while selling it one seat at a time versus selling it as a business.
Mhm.
And basically that was an admission that they'd come to the conclusion they couldn't win in that market space, at least to my mind.
Mm.
And so then that was followed by Atos, and then Alcatel-Lucent, and now by Mitel. So when you look at it, with the exception of NEC, all of the install base, or the vast majority of the install base that's not Cisco, has now essentially been acquired as a right to sell to by Ring Central.
So I thought Avaya, in protest, for lack of a better word, once Verizon got this partnership post Avaya, right, with Ring, I thought they kind of protested and went to Azure. No, maybe I might be wrong.
I mean, the problem is going to Azure. What did they go to Azure with? I mean, it's probably not the discussion of today, but taking Call Manager and running on an Azure is not the same as a multi-tenant cloud that you can sell to people with 30 seats. And so, somebody say, well, we're upset with them, we're going to go to Azure. It's like, oh, okay.
But Phil, do you really think they did the story very well for Avaya for their install base? At least in Canada, I found they did a very poor story.
I really didn't address the story. I was addressing the strategy.
Yeah, but do you really think customers adopted to that? Because my customers were confused.
I mean, I think the problem is a significant challenge, which is, what is the persuasive value proposition to migrate from one platform to an alternative platform that's fundamentally different? Phone migration would be one. Then beyond that, it's basically relationship, either relationship with the channel or relationship with the vendor.
Right, because to let you know, one of my customers, actually who was a vendor partner, just took the IP office, put it in the cloud, and now he's, doing what you're saying, right? So he brought his customers that had their install base with those platforms onto his data center. So, but again, the story's for.
And that's a great concept, what will fail, because the cloud's going to win in the end. And the cloud is not about technology. That's people's mistake. The cloud is about a business model transformation. And it's about, when I run 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 million seats, the efficiency of that operation, the repetition, the standardization, the specialization, the people, drives costs down dramatically.
Interesting. I don't find it actually bringing the cost down that dramatically.
So the problem is you're just looking at the vendor cost. That's not what you look at. You look at the admin cost.
Yeah, I am looking at that, because most of them can't admin call centers at all. So I'm still having to spend a lot of time and energy there.
That's different than UCAS, but that will change. That's going to change also, because they're just starting to move to the cloud. And by the way, if you're doing IP office contact centers, they're not in the cloud. None of that's in the cloud yet. You're still administering a premise system that you've hosted on a cloud compute platform. That's not cloud.
Right. Well,
it works for customers, right?
It's not
they don't really care where it is, just so it's functioning.
But eventually the business models catch. I don't want. This wasn't the discussion that we were going to have, but eventually the business models. I mean, all you guys got to look is happening at every other sector, right? The volume wins.
No, agreed. And Eric Kraft and I have talked, over the last year and a half, and have noticed that if you look closely at most of these cloud providers, one of the key underlying words is AWS. So no matter what you do, you're kind of attached to AWS and their performance, if you will. So the like for like, forgetting about Ring for a second, has been around with us for actually quite a while. And how do you combat that? Well, there's a couple of ways. Mark had mentioned that he has dedicated instances of Mitel's cloud solution as one example. There are Avaya vendors also that sell their own cloud solution with their own data centers, based upon the premise. They licensed it out privately, Converge one being one example. And yeah, and the bottom line is you can always negotiate a better contract with any vendor, and the uniqueness of each vendor and how they deliver on their product and feature functionality will also differentiate. So it's not like we don't need consultants. So I need you guys, it's real simple.
I love that line, Steve. Keep talking it up.
Well, I think the role changes though. It's less about
Right.
the technology and the operation of the technology, because that's managed by the cloud people.
Mhm.
It's by the cloud vendor. It's now a lot more about the application of the technology and how it influences the business. And that's,
Right.
by the way, what we're going to talk about today.
Excellent. Yeah, and as everybody knows, there are variances. We just signed recently, or my client did, on a Vonage contract. And as long as we bought VeloCloud along with Vonage for voice and SD-WAN services, they gave us a 5 nines model. And of course, Microsoft and a Microsoft Teams only model provides a 3 nines model. So from a reliability point of view, that can be a differentiator as well. So, well, let's get started. Thanks everybody for joining. We've got a lot of things going on. We just had our SCTC conference last week, and I'm still coming off the high. I haven't worked in 2 weeks. And I'm catching up as Chuck and Denise and the rest of us are, who are out there. It was fantastic. Actually 5 total, Denise included, and COVID was great. Super big thank you to Robert Harris, who organized and ran the entire conference. It went like clockwork. And we now have a new president, which I will introduce to you in a moment. So let me share my screen here, and I will go to here. Let me share this. Okay, and then we got this, and then this, and then this. Sorry, everybody. And what is this? Norton keeps popping up with crap. Okay, here. So, where are we? Sorry. Okay. So, boom. Okay, so yes, today is Fireside Chat number 79. Okay, and believe it or not, in the 79 Fireside Chats, we have really not done any repeats of major topics yet. So this particular topic is on CPaaS. And what is it? Why is it a key part of your practice moving forward? So if you read the promotional blurb, the market was at $4 billion in 2019 and is expected to go to $25 billion. Okay, and keep in mind, the pizza market is a little over 1 billion. Okay, and it takes about $1 billion to make a market. So CPaaS would be a $25 billion market, according to market research, I think is the name, by 2025, which when you think about it, we're into 2022 already in 2 months. So that's only 36 months out, a little over that, and some pretty huge, growth that's expected. Okay, so let me give you 2 quick polling questions here, as I always do. Okay, and the quick poll number 1 is CPaaS. Okay, and the question is, what does CPaaS stand for? What is the definition of it? Is it communications process as a service, communications procedure as a service, communications platform as a service, communications panic as a service, or communications procrastination as a service? And I guessed procrastination, but I knew I was wrong. So we'll let everybody finish it up here. And this is pretty cool. Let me end the poll. And let me just take a quick snapshot, as I always do. And let me share my results. And the class gets 100 out of 100. Okay, everybody selected communications platform as a service. Fantastic, you're in the business. All right, one more question here. Stop the share. So question number 2 is, why is CPaaS important to a client or prospect? You can check all that apply here. Okay, is it an overall better customer experience, real-time communication with the client, better metrics and customer data, a more informed client and relationship, status updates on a need basis, or a way to over communicate with your client?
Should have none of the above.
Why is that, Chuck?
Well, I'm going to wait till I hear more. As they say nothing till you hear more.
Okay.
It is anonymous, Chuck, if you answer. No judgment.
That was good, Robert. Thanks. Yes, we're graded on a C based upon the curve. Okay, let me just wrap this up here. Everybody kind of finished here? Yep, let me finish this out. Let me end the poll here. Let me take a quick picture again. Oh, jeez. Got more calls today. Sorry. This will only take a second here. Let me share the results. And the results is the big winner is an overall better customer experience, followed by real-time communication, followed by better metrics, followed by almost literally descending curve here, more informed client relationship and customer updates on a need-to-know basis, and a way to over-communicate. Of course, that was a joke, the last one, but depending upon how you read it. Okay, great. Well, thanks. Phil, if you want a copy of that, I'd be more than happy to send that to you, okay? So let's go on. So recap happenings last week. Many thanks to Ram Mangani and Paul Aiello from NEC for the last fireside chat on the future of the workplace. What does it look like? It was a great series for any members. You can go in and watch the entire one and skip through unnecessary areas and go right to the meat of the presentation. There was a lot in there as to where our market is headed. Aha moments, again, chat it in the Zoom room, please, on the side, and then please mute, as we continue. Okay, so a quick conversation that just happened on the Sctc listserv, okay, because we have a listserv that literally communicates with all of our vendors. In fact, let me just pause for a second. Robert, you want to quickly explain what our listserv is and does? Robert Harris?
Sure, yeah, I just had to unmute, Steve. The listserv is a traditional listserv broadcast to your email, and it's open. We have two different lists, one that is open to our consultant members for discussions about various topics, and all the information is kept confidential within the listserv. We also have an all members listserv that is used to communicate for our entire membership, both vendor members and consultants, and it's been a great source of exchange for information. I do know that a lot of people have not don't understand some of the original guidelines we gave to help manage it, how to have your listserv posts go into a special folder using email rules and things like that. So if you are interested in learning about that so that you don't just get inundated with every single post for discussion, I can help you with that. You can either go into digest mode, you can set it up for digest mode, but you can also put it in a special folder, which is what I do, and then I can see, oh, there's new messages to go in. So we do have some documentation that will help with that, but it's been very useful resource for the membership.
Absolutely. And when people typically have an issue like this one, where they are having a problem sourcing Polycom phones, one of our members had an answer this morning. So here's the answer. We recommend swimming out to sea off of the California coast and bringing gifts to each of the 100 freighters. And according to our colleague, it was right in that container, all the Polycom phones. Anyway, it was a nice conversation. Okay, so this week we have Phil at home again, and it'll be pretty much exclusively Phil this week. It turns out that Sanjay, who was with us at the conference last week, suddenly caught a severe case of the flu. So I'll be helping with his infomercial today. He'll be on likely next week, and we'll continue the journey on this particular topic, okay? Thanks, Phil, again for helping with your time here. So quick infomercial. So there's a challenge, multiple client needs on a project, multiple vendor solutions, multiple contracts, multiple SLAs, no one throat to choke for accountability. I'm sure as consultants, we've all been through that. And typically the fewer number of vendors, the better in a solution. So in the case of Vonage, they actually provide SIP trunking, Microsoft Teams integration with direct routing. They actually have some APIs and overlays into Teams as well. I'm fairly knowledgeable on it because we're using them. They have a hybrid model, including analog and ATA adapters. They have a CCAS contact center as a service for sales, very specific to Salesforce and very tight integration into Salesforce. It requires unified communications and SD-WAN. Again, they partnered with VeloCloud on a very tight basis. So what is your client? So I didn't really know what SFTC was until I realized it was Salesforce.com. Okay, but if your client has it, or going to it, they'll hear about Salesforce integration in Salesforce Voice. So there's two top providers being Vonage and Amazon. And according to our friends over at Vonage, Amazon is more of a DIY with really no API integration or customization. So just some food for thought. So, and now a word from our president. We now welcome our new president, Denise Monroe. Welcome, Denise.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be serving again this year on the board. Just a couple of things. First, big shout out to Robert Harris and his conference planning committee. I think everyone that came to San Diego's conference last week had an amazing time, not only content-wise, but to everyone socially, seeing people in 3 dimensions instead of behind a pane of glass was just so invigorating and exciting. And we just had a great time learning and networking and the like. So big shout out to Robert and his team. So happy with the turnout. So also we had our elections, and obviously I am now serving as your president, and we have a whole new board of directors, and those folks have been posted on the listserv. We also have a new VAC board and VAC president. Dave Clardy from Mitel is the VAC president for this year. So very excited about all the opportunities we have in front of us. And we'll put we'll post all of that new updated information on the website this week. So very happy to work with all of these folks going forward to serve the organization. And last but not least, we did announce at the conference where next year's conference is going to be. And Steve, if you want to do a drum roll. As they say, the stars at night are big and bright. Deep in the heart of Texas. We're going to Dallas next year, which is where I find my home. And the dates haven't been, we're going to post this on the website, so you don't have to write it down, but October 23rd through the 26th of next year. We are starting on a Sunday this year and ending on a Wednesday. So it'll give some opportunity to get back to the office with a little bit more time to bill, etc. So we're super excited about the venue. It's a brand new, beautiful hotel, just minutes from both airports, and we're looking to have a really great time. And anyway, so we hopefully will have a great time in Dallas. Looking forward to seeing everyone, and just so happy to look forward to what we're doing next year. So
welcome, Denise. And I understand that Chuck was very eager to relinquish his seat as president over to you. I'm just teasing. Yeah, let me keep going here. Well, welcome, Denise, and looking forward to your presidency. Okay, let me keep going here. It looks like I'm stuck. Okay, so I'm going to give the screen over to Phil now. Okay, I'm going to stop my share. Phil, you're more than welcome to start, and we're looking forward to Phil's augmented reality, no, just kidding, his series or his slants and discussion around CPAS. So Phil, take it away.
Cool. I assume I'm sharing so y'all can see, and I will go from there. So today we're really going to talk about communication meets business transformation, which is now CPAS. It's really interesting because this has been actually now about a 14-year journey. This all started back in about 2007, 2008. If you remember CBEP, Communication Enabled Business Processes from Avaya, Nortel had a thing called ACE. There was, at that point, people began to realize that if you integrated communications into a business process, you could change the business process. And in fact, at Nortel, we partnered with Microsoft in 2006 because we realized they were going to win the knowledge worker arena because they owned the knowledge worker's business process. The real value was winning the rest of the business. because we concluded the business value is an order of magnitude higher in the rest of the business of applying communications to business process than for knowledge workers. So this is a long-term journey. It's just now it's become reality. So what we want to do is talk a little bit about what it is and why I think it's going to be a key part of all communication practices going forward. So the first thing is, convergence is driving everything. If you think about our industry, we had two totally separate parallel technology stack structures in 1975, right? Even the processors that were used in telecom, the operating systems that were used in telecom, everything had been developed separate from the computer industry. There were some core technologies that were the same, but generally everything was separate. But over time, what happened was the computing industry's mass and speed overtook to a great extent the telecoms industry's ability to innovate, and convergence started. It started with operating systems, processors, et cetera, and it's now moved all the way up to the cloud infrastructure, where, if you think about a cloud communication system today, where other than the SIP trunking that's involved is the remaining telecom infrastructure that's left? There's very minimal. The next stage on this is CPaaS. CPaaS is providing communication elements as easy to implement elements into a business process or into an application. And that leads to this whole concept of application. And the next thing beyond that is this whole team task worker processes and what I'm going to talk about around frontline. So the important thing to think about is this is an ongoing process and it will continue, because in the end, communications is going to become a functional block in the majority of applications that need it versus being a separate instantiated thing. That's the future. So if you look at our role in providing solutions to businesses, I would argue we provide three specific solutions. First is employee communications. Those are communications that enable an employee to do their job. If I'm an employee and I need to talk to customers, I need a communication tool to talk to customers. Those customers are on the PSTN, I need access to the PSTN. If they'd rather see me on video, I need a video tool. When I go to talk to customers, that's customer communications. For employees, it may be me talking to Bob or me talking to Steve, another employee. But in the bottom left, there's the thing that is really now emerging, which is application communications. And application communications are different, because if you think about it, how prior to about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, every communication event was driven by a human being. Somebody dialed a phone number, somebody hit a speed dial, something happened to cause the communication event, and it was always driven by a human decision and action. What's happening now is the communication events are being driven by an application, where the application is making a decision that communication event should happen right now. And this is a fundamental change. So what happens is, on the left, you have an application business process trigger. Something in the business process is a trigger that says a communication needs to occur. There are no parts in the bin, and two people need to talk about getting parts into the bin. There's things are out of spec. We need to notify someone to check because things are out of spec. That then gets triggered into a communication platform, which then sends that interaction and sets up the interaction with either a human being to that machine, causes two humans to communicate, or may actually be machine to machine, though that is probably more unlikely to be implemented through this schema versus others. So if you think about it, how does this really work? So this is a really interesting. How many of you have gotten a reminder text from your for example, from your dentist? Anybody gotten one of those? Anybody gotten one? So how does that happen? Well, it's really simple. So in the application, there's an API. And with the API, you can basically request from the application, for example, I want to know the names of all the people who have appointments tomorrow on a specific date. So you do a query request, because the application has a database in your dentist's office. The dentist's office application has all the appointments scheduled, so it has all the appointments for tomorrow. And within those applications, there's a query capability to go in and query and say, give me the names and email or phone numbers of everyone who has an appointment tomorrow. that API goes into some sort of integration application. Though more and more, by the way, these are being implemented within some of the business process applications. I'll talk about that. That integration application then turns around and talks to another API. Everybody I assume knows what an API, an application programming interface. It's basically a way of me sending a message to another machine that asks it to do something. So it's a specific format. We identify ourselves typically using some sort of logon process that's automated, and then I can send a message. So if you look at what happens here, the API to the CPaaS platform typically will have two things. The first thing it will have is it will have the actual message. Reminder, you have an appointment tomorrow at call 408 to change, cancel, or reply 1 to confirm. And then what it'll have is a list of phone numbers, not names, just phone numbers. And that gets handed off as an API call. So it gets sent through the cloud. There's a registration. It gets sent up to that CPaaS application communication platform. The CPaaS platform then takes that information and says, I'll take that message and I'll send it as a text message to every one of the phone numbers I was given. And that's really all it is. It's very simple. It's a series of just connections to standard messaging, no different than any other API. Now, on the other end, so person's now gotten that text, and they now click 1 as a reply. That comes back to the application platform. Then it puts as an API that says, I received this as a return message, and it has what the message was that was sent. That gets read by the integration application, and now it marks in the calendar that in fact appointment has been confirmed. So this is basically how CPaaS works in a very simple implementation of a notification. And you'll notice one thing very important here. The CPaaS application didn't have any interaction beyond the basic process, right? If you want to change your appointment, you dial a phone number, and quite frankly, the CPaaS application in this case has no idea you do that. It just, you never confirmed, so it never went through the confirmation process. The other thing that's really important to note is the CPaaS application is not maintaining state. State is never maintained in that application. It's either maintained in the process application or potentially in the integration application, but generally in the process application. So in this case, the CPaaS is actually a stateless thing that's just doing work. Is that clear, kind of clear to everyone how that works? Anyone got any questions? Pause for a moment. Cool. So if you look at CPaaS, there really are two options to get CPaaS. The first option is you can get it from a CPaaS vendor. So people who do not provide a complete UC solution on their own. Probably the best example of this is Twilio. You know, Twilio started as a CPaaS company. They're clearly in the process of evolving to be much more of a customer experience company because a lot of CPaaS is very much involved with customer experience. You have then people like Bandwidth and Telepeer and Tata who are traditional network bandwidth providers and PSTN access providers who are offering a CPaaS solution, and folks like Vonage as well. On the other side, you have the UCaaS vendors. So if you look at the UCaaS vendors, every UCaaS vendor is rapidly trying to introduce APIs and CPaaS functionality as part of their larger UCaaS solution. In other words, the message is, you don't need to go to Twilio, you can use us for this. And by the way, we integrate it much more effectively with the communication platform your employees are using. So one of the key questions I think for in this industry today is, which of these two options do you choose and how? So if we start there and we start to begin to think about what else is happening, one of the big changes is CPaaS is in the process of evolving. So if you think about most of the CPaaS that's happened over the last 5-6 years, it's really been related to the PSTN, sending you an SMS message on your phone, driving a phone call to you, that kind of thing, that really is around the PSTN. What's interesting is that we're now moving to CPaaS becoming part of the IP web. And I think we can make a pretty good argument that over the next 5 years, we will see more and more of CPaaS move away from being PSTN based and be more video based and more on that side. And we're seeing this, for example, with people moving from SMS to having direct integration with things like Apple and Android messaging, the underlying messaging platforms, which are all IP based. So this is one of the things we need to kind of analyze as we go forward. Probably for most of us on this call, the bigger thing is understanding when employee interaction happens. So, before when we talked about this, it was just a notification process. And as I said, the employee interaction didn't happen within the CPaaS system. But the interesting question is, what happens if we want the employee interaction to be part of that actual communication system?
Who's that? Oh, I got it. Hey, Phil, sorry.
That's okay. I figured I'd stop until it went away. So basically this, if there's employee interaction, do you want it to stay in the same system or do you want it to go to something different? So this now lets us begin to think about what our options are for CPaaS as we begin to think about what the client wants and what the vendors offer. So if you look here on this chart, 4-box consultants, we got to do 4-box diagrams. On the bottom, you have CPaaS 1.0 and 2.0, the website. And then on the left, you have no employee interaction on the top. So this is just pure notification and then employee interaction on the bottom. So if I look, for example, at what Twilio is doing, what Twilio is doing is trying to take their success on the top, where there was no employee interaction, and extend it down into the bottom with Flex and their contact center focus to be able to say, we support this entire box.
She looked like E.T.
I can't find her.
Can everybody mute, please?
Yes, can everyone mute, please? Sorry.
You can mute all, just mute all, and then I'll unmute.
Yeah, how do I mute all?
It's under, it's at the top under participants.
I drove here to go to Brown County with you guys.
I'm looking, sorry.
Open the participants window, and at the bottom, it says mute all.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Steve, it's
I
Barb.
don't see it. Sorry. Hold on. Okay, I got it. Thanks.
Okay, so we'll continue on. So basically, as I said, Twilio started at the top and they've moved down towards the bottom. Clearly, most of our traditional UCaaS vendors are starting at the bottom and moving up into the top to do those things as well. But it is an interesting thought process as you talk to customers to think about those differences. What I'd like to do is now switch from talking about kind of the technology of CPaaS and rather to talk about the market. So the market for CPaaS is really entwined with the concept of frontline. So frontline is something that doesn't mean what people think about when you think about nurses and frontline healthcare workers. Frontline is a much more generic position of a worker who doesn't manage their own business process. So any worker who follows some sort of formal, defined business process is now by definition a frontline worker. So the idea is you have a formal business process which is defined. It can be defined in writing, it can be defined in a computer system, it can be defined any way, but the worker doesn't make their decisions. So for example, everyone on this call made the decision to be on this call today, and it was a personal decision. You weren't told by a business process that you should be on this call today. That would make you a knowledge worker. Frontline workers are people who, for example, field service technician gets up in the morning, looks at his tablet and says, oh, these are my appointments for the day, and follows what's on his tablet in terms of what he's going to do for the day, he or she's going to do for the day. So frontline workers really interface with potentially with information systems, which is where a lot of the business process runs now, but they also have a lot of human interaction.
Bill, can I just ask a quick question? So in my world of 911, the frontline workers would be the 911 call takers in the 911 dispatch, and it wouldn't be the police or fire, or the could be?
Police and fire are generally also frontline workers.
Okay.
Because so the whole perspective is a policeman doesn't get the decision to say, well, I'm going to work from home today and work on this project, which you as so here's kind of a chart of this idea. So this goes back, And you guys may remember me talking about this years ago, this concept, there were three kinds of workers: knowledge, information, and service workers. The worker definition is based on how your work process is structured. So service workers have a structured process, but they don't use an information system to structure their job. So, for example, I may drive a UPS delivery truck. I may want packages in and out, but I'm not using a computer to tell me what my next delivery is necessarily. I may not be having a computer telling me where to turn. I'm actually following a more defined process that's defined just as this is your route. So that applies to, you see some types of roles there. Information workers use a computer system, an information system, to define the structure of their job. So that field service technician, a contact center agent, they're people who use a computer system to tell them what to do next. Knowledge workers, on the other hand, define their own business process. They decide what they're going to do next. They decide where they're going to go. And that really changes them into a whole different world because they're not defined by the business process. Their business process is a personal business process. Well, I used to talk to groups of IT people and I asked them, how many of you have a personal business process? And a small percentage of hands would go up. And then that's why I'd ask is, how the hell did you know you were supposed to be here today?
Mm-hmm.
Who told you? That's the whole point. Is if you made yourself get there, you have a personal business process. By the way, 90% of the people that have personal business processes use what product to build their personal business process? Does anybody know? What's the tool that the majority?
Outlook?
Nah, not Outlook. It's
Okay.
a little bit bigger than Outlook. Outlook's part of it.
Email?
It's Office.
Okay.
No, it's Office. Office 365. Office and Office 365 are far and away the dominant personal process software used by knowledge workers. By the way, I suggest right now, where we have 40 participants. I put a bet down 30 of you use Office. Anybody want to take it?
Sounds like a polling question, Steve.
Yeah, sounds like a good question for next week, Phil. Yeah, I'm adding it.
There you go. But the point is, people, and by the way, your customers, 60 to 70% of large enterprises have standardized on Office for their knowledge workers. So it's very much on the knowledge worker side. What's happened now is information service workers are now called frontline workers. So when you hear the word frontline workers, it's referring to that rest of the workforce. Now, what I'd like to draw you're down to is the bottom there. In the US, pretty well accepted now, about 25% of the workforce are knowledge workers, which means 75% of the workforce are in fact not knowledge workers. So I'll run you through a couple of numbers. I didn't put these in the slides, but if we have 120 million workers, 160 million and 160 million total workers in the US and Canada, including private and public sector workers, that would mean there are 40 million knowledge workers, 25%. If there are 120 million paid business communication seats in North America, which is a pretty good number, and 40 million are knowledge workers, that would say 80 million of the paid communication seats are actually for frontline workers. So 2/3 of the investment in communication platforms is actually for frontline work. So just interesting data to kind of think about as you realize that the bigger market is not the knowledge workers. It's actually the frontline workers. And I didn't put this in either because there wasn't enough time, but if you look at the benefit to knowledge workers of all these communication tools, they are only about productivity gains, about 3 or 4%, 5%. If you look at what happens with frontline, they're business process gains. A 5% improvement in frontline is a 5% improvement on the revenue or cost levels of the business. And the value of that is dramatically higher than the productivity gains in knowledge workers. When you can change the business, you change the world. When you change how Bob works, you don't change the world. So with that in mind, I want to put this up. This is from Marty Parker. It's actually from 2018 data of his. He talks about 8 key usage profiles. And if you add those up in 2018, he concluded about 23.3% were the people that really needed the collaboration tools at that time. Again, those tools were primarily or predominantly used by knowledge workers. So what is frontline communication? So frontline communication starts with the business process. If the business process doesn't need communications to change it, there's no real reason to do frontline communications. You then have workers that are in the process, and we can add to those communication and collaboration events to affect the business process. So for example, maybe that I'm talking to a potential customer and I encounter a problem. How do I get an expert into the call? Because if I do that, I have a 75% higher close rate. That's a good example of integrating into frontline communications. Or another example would be I'm a worker. I'm a field service technician. I'm doing a very complex task, one which I've been trained on, but has complexity that's maybe beyond my current abilities. And I now can engage an expert who can help walk me through the process remotely. And that way I don't have to have a second callback, and it's much more effective for the company. So lots of ways of integrating communication and collaboration into the business process. The other side of this is work structure tools. So does the frontline communication platform provide work structure tools, things like scheduling, those kinds of things? And then the last area, which is the area that I think is still not really well defined, is what I'm going to call team tools. So can you add and use these team tools to reorganize the business process? So let me talk about how this could work. So you are one of 8 field service technicians that work for Comcast in a local community. The way your system works today is ServiceNow takes the appointments, allocates them to the different people based on schedules, may do it dynamically during the day. And as a field service technician, you basically open your tablet and you're told where to make your next call. You really have no control over your work process. So imagine we take the team technology we all have and we put it together for those 8 field service technicians. So at 8 o'clock in the morning, instead of getting a list of jobs, they get on a quick team meeting and they're presented as a group with all the field service calls they need to serve as a group that day. And they get to decide how to allocate those tasks. And it turns out I'm really good at doing whole house replacements. There are 3 of those on the list. So I say I'll take those because I do those very efficiently and nobody else likes to do them. And by the way, Bob's son lives up north and he says, can I take all the ones up north because I can have lunch with my son then? And it turns out that the US Army has been focused on small group self-organization for 60 years because what they've realized is that's the key to success. Small groups that are self-organizing are dramatically more productive, have dramatically improved employee or participant satisfaction, and have dramatically better outcomes and customer satisfaction. So it turns out we can use all these tools to begin to reimagine work in new and different ways and give employees a much bigger role in the work process. So if you think about it, what this becomes is ways of doing micro business processes. So imagine you're a company and your top end product is really complex. And it turns out most of the guys in customer support just can't deal with it, but there are 5 people who really can. They're primarily engineers. And it turns out there are 10 customers you have that have absolutely, they know how to take care of this stuff. If they have a problem, them talking to the normal customer support people is really not going to help. They need to be able to deal with one of those 5 top engineers quickly to solve their problem. And you trust that if they need that, they really need it. So what you do is you put those 5 engineers into a team group. And when a customer reports a problem, that gets put into the team group, probably as an automated API process, and is offered to those 5 engineers and said, hey, this customer needs to talk to someone. Are you available to talk to them? And by the way, interesting thought process is to think about all the things you can do on the back end with gamification to manage how employees interact with these systems in very interesting ways. So you very quickly can take things you can never build in a big contact center and do them in small ways to do small group management. So what Frontline is really transforming the business processes, and especially coming out of COVID, we know every organization is rethinking their business processes. So as they redesign their business processes, rethink completely. And one of the keys is, how do you resist black swan events? How do you how can you exist if you have a facility no one can come into? And social distancing is important in that future business process definition. So if you think about it, communications is going to be absolutely critical for all of these process reengineerings. And being there in the right place with the right solutions is going to be important. One thing that's really important is we've been selling to a great extent the adoption of the knowledge worker UCaaS use case for the last 10 years. What's important is the frontline worker use case is fundamentally different, because what happens in knowledge workers is we take the communication and collaboration tool set, we provide it to the workers, and they learn how to adopt it within their business process within their organization. And you may get some vertical similarities in adoption, but they're all going to be very different. And I can probably tell you that we have 40 people on here. Probably almost all of you use these communication tools in different ways, because you get to decide how you use them in adoption. What's fundamentally different in the front line is the communication, collaboration, and tool set is integrated into the business process application. So the worker, when they use the application, they actually use that communication process as part of the application. And this is why generally just giving tools to frontline workers saying, hey, we gave them a collaboration tool, they don't know how to use it and they don't understand how to apply it to the process. You have to integrate it into the business process. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I put this chart on. This is a kind of a use case taxonomy of kind of at work, away from work, the use case type, and kind of collaboration and team spaces. And I'll let you just kind of look through that separately later. What's really important is that what's emerging in this frontline ecosystem is you have those APIs we talked about earlier, the same APIs that are with CPaaS that you can integrate in. And those are used to integrate other applications in. There are devices, the general devices we have today, but there's also beginning to be dedicated devices and more augmented reality devices, especially AR, not so much VR, because virtual reality is kind of isolating, but AR devices, especially when you look at things like field service, for that field service technician who's out there having a pair of AR glasses that enables someone else to see what he's looking at and enables him to see information, can be very valuable. Then we add to that the frontline services and tools. So scheduling, notifications, walkie-talkies, fine and escalation. So I put in a couple of Microsoft examples because I will tell you that Microsoft in this frontline is being incredibly aggressive, because Microsoft is today generally constrained to that knowledge worker space with Office and that. Clearly with Azure and other things, they've got a much broader footprint across IT, but they're now having to compete in the business process space with AWS. So one thing that they've seen as a way to lead in that space is to really provide great solutions for those frontline workers. In fact, in Teams, there's a $4 frontline option for frontline workers that's designed specifically for those workers. So these are some examples of the Microsoft tools. If you look down here, there's a walkie-talkie tool. This is actually uses Android today, but they're doing iOS. So the idea is now all your employees, you can have a walkie-talkie or radio system. Other tools and outcomes, they've got shifts. They use the team workspace and they use workflows. What's really interesting about what Microsoft is doing is they're actually taking a lot of these flows from the back end, from their environments that create applications, and integrating those with Teams. So one of the things you can do very rapidly is you can go in and create an application where you actually take a task completed and you actually, for example, take a notification, have someone look at it, note it, and then complete it, and you can write that essentially in a codeless environment. So that's an important part of this, is more and more these things that started with CPaaS are now moving to codeless applications that you can develop to integrate with different business processes. The last question I think all of us are going to have to deal with is, do we use a communication platform, or do we have direct application comms integration? So, if it's a user that only interacts with one specific application, that field service technician, a salesman who really only interacts with Salesforce, is it better to integrate the communications into that application, or is it better to have that application drive communications on a general purpose platform? And I think I'll argue, I think one of the things that will emerge here is whether it's a single app or a multiple app user. So in a single app user, if I'm, for example, using ServiceNow, whether it's a communication platform or a direct application implementation, that's the only thing I ever use. When I go over to the other side as a multiple application user, if I've got multiple applications, each with a unique communications platform and use communication interface and user experience, it could be very confusing. So for multiple app user organizations that have multiple applications, having a common communication platform may in fact be an advantage. So this is an area we need to look at, as that beyond just the basic functionality, which one makes the most sense for you. The other thing that's really important is frontline adoption is really driven by IT only for certain projects. The business unit really starts driving this because it's really around the business process. In other words, IT may come in and suggest something, but often it's going to start with the business unit. It's going to start with someone saying, oh, you know, I just got a notification from my dentist. What if we could do notifications to our customers that they had a service call coming up tomorrow? How do we do that? And these simple integrations can't even be BU driven. They're driven in the marketing department. They're driven by hiring a consultant to do a very simple CPaaS integration. But then when you get with IT is when it gets more complex. So important thing, if you're only if you're only working with IT, you may not see a CPaaS project until it's very well implemented. Most of the decisions are already made. So I wanted to just kind of close with the opportunity for SCTC members. So the first thing is, I kind of talked a little about this before. I think every member needs to be thinking about cloud minimization. You know, once people get to the cloud with these highly structured systems in the cloud, a lot of the decisions and complexity that consultants used to work through may not be there. I say may not, we can argue that, but definitely it's a concern. So one of the questions is, how do you change your relationship from being a technology consultant, when technology consulting may not be as important, to much more of a business strategy transformation consultant? And so I think it starts with beginning to ask your customers the right questions. So what is your company churn? How many of you know what your churn is for your customers?
Good question.
I mean, it's a very interesting question to ask your customers. Your customers know. What's your churn? And then the next, what causes churn? Why do your customers lose you? If you lose 5%, 10% of your customers every year, why do you lose 5 to 10% of your customers every year? What are the reasons you don't close deals? What are the 3 biggest headaches your CEO has? How often do your processes fail? These are the kind of questions you want to begin to ask, because what you're doing is, it's not about what features do you need. It's about how does your business run? How does your business change? And then the last question that's really interesting is, with what I can do to transform your business with your frontline, I can increase your business profitability by 20 to 30%. Not revenue, profitability. Is that, would that be interesting to the CEO? Would your CEO be interested in that? This is the thing, guys. We're really talking about something very different. It's not which vendor do you buy anymore to save a little money. It's the fact that I can fundamentally change my business and change my business process. So I'll kind of close with saying that I think frontline is really going to be the focus of the 2020s. And CPaaS is, to me, kind of the doorway in many ways to this whole frontline. You know, CPaaS and frontline workers together have this real defined value. You can increase revenue because you basically close the loopholes that are causing you to have churn and to lose deals. You can reduce cost dramatically in many cases. When you have an exception, you can close the exception an order of magnitude faster, which, for example, if you have an assembly line shut down, what is it worth per minute when that's shut down? The ROI potential is huge. Like I said, when we went through this in 2008, I did a strategy presentation to the board at Nortel and showed them that the potential return on what we were referring to then as business process UC or business UC was 20 times what it was for the simple collaboration UC for knowledge workers. And the other thing that's really important is you can not only improve the process, but strengthen the process by making it much more resistant to black swan events and other things that are happening. And finally, your customers can differentiate themselves, improve customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, reduce turnover. So with that, that was kind of a little talk about CPaaS and kind of taking CPaaS into what I think is really the evolution of CPaaS, which is the front line, and especially because so much of the front line is about interacting with customers. So I guess I'll stop sharing and see if there are any questions or comments.
Yeah, so we're just a couple of minutes over, so we'll take one or two questions from anybody. Again, I know that we kind of breezed through this and went into some detail. Phil, I do have one question regarding the front line, right? Because that kind of emerged as a subtopic within CPaaS, right? So is part of the intent to communicate with the frontline workers through CPaaS or generate a whole new model, or both?
And again, I think it depends on your business, right? So for example, if I'm a company with a lot of part-time employees, I might very well decide just to use CPaaS and SMS as a way to message to my employees when they're away from work. So that's a frontline implementation using simple CPaaS. On the other hand, I might decide to buy my employees a Microsoft frontline account, because that gives me a lot more integration with other Microsoft processes like their scheduling tools and that kind of thing. So I think a lot depends on what is the business process you're trying to resolve. And I think that's what makes this so exciting for consultants is there's not a lot of one size fits all options in this space.
Yeah, agreed.
I have a question. I actually put it online, but I'd like to rephrase it.
Yeah,
part of what your whole ROI, Phil, is based on the idea that there are no technology processes in place for frontline, and really there's a lot that exists from the cellular market. I think that Microsoft has been hurt by having a poor cellular and mobile device strategy as far as penetrating that market. So does that diminish the ROI, and do you think that Microsoft can overcome that challenge just by adding a frontware version of their software?
I guess I would actually respond by asking a question. Who is Microsoft's major competitor?
You mean in the front line? I think it's probably 100 different niches, depending on whether it's supply chain tracking or whether it's it really depends. So you're right, they don't have one major
No, I would argue it's I would argue it's AWS.
Okay.
I would argue their biggest competitor. And what's AWS's mobile strategy? What's their cellular device strategy?
I don't think that that's their major competitor in this market.
But it is. But that's my point is. My point is.
Well, because AWS doesn't offer an Office suite. So this is not the Office market. This is the frontline market. And right. And a lot of the devices there will either be generic devices, i.e. the smartphone the employee bought because it's BYOD, or it may be highly specialized devices that have vertical functionality. And Microsoft definitely doesn't want to be in the business of building vertical devices with specific functionality. I wouldn't think. And, the fact is, virtually no one in this business is going to be in the business of building mobile devices. Since there are only two companies really in the business in the US of building mobile devices, that's Samsung and Apple. And they're really not predominant in this space. And I wouldn't argue that they're going to be the predominant vendors. So I think the reality is, this is not about, unless it's a bespoke device for a vertical industry, it's a generic device. And if it's a generic device, it's just an application running on that device for the instantiation of the value at the location. So but they are competing against a whole array, and I don't know the market well enough because I'm enterprise communications as well. Right. But there are a whole array of specialized mobile only applications that are used for supply chain and for tracking and for service fulfillment that they are competing against, that they have to replace. And then there's less ROI because those processes are already automated on mobile only applications. Yeah.
Again, we'll have to see. That's a part of the market too.
The ROI has to come from the collaboration between knowledge workers and service workers. The service workers already are in their own silo, and are already using processes.
but those processes can be, the service worker processes are not optimized whatsoever.
You mean because they're not integrated with the knowledge
Right.
workers, or why?
Or even between them, they're not using some of the next generation technologies we've talked about. They may be some level of mobile integration, but again, you don't have necessarily, for example, a capability of having someone help you. That's not necessarily a knowledge worker expert. It may be, Bob, who's the lead technician in our group of 8. So I think you're right. There are mobile applications that are there. Those are frontline. You would argue those are frontline. Now, when those get changed more to deal more with the total process than a small implementation on the edge of the front line, will that cause a change? Anyway, I think it's an interesting question, but the point here is, we've generally in our business considered frontline all those other phones. We talk about it, as non-assigned phones or public area phones. They're not assigned to an individual. Those have been, from a telephony perspective, our frontline service offer, other than contact center. And now what you're saying is a much more complex frontline service offer. And I think that changes things.
Well, I do have a question about coming from the contact center perspective. Again, this is great, the idea that we can bridge in someone and tech support or another group, right? But you and I both know that most of those workers, unless they're socialized into understanding that they could potentially be asked to participate and help out a frontline center contact center person, I'm finding that's going to be our biggest challenge, not the technology. Because most of those individuals, that's a socializing thing. That's the technology is not the issue. You and I both know, if I'm with a customer now and I just had this with Comcast as I'm hooking up my mom's phone, can you imagine trying to talk to the actual technician in that, and not only a training and education standpoint, but really it has to come down to, are we going to allow those quote unquote interruptions?
So I think that's a management philosophy. I would say, I would tell my personal opinion. I think the word center is the problem with contact center.
It's just a word. I mean, whatever you call it, right?
But it's an implication in two ways. It's an implication of physicality, and it's an implementation of closed group. And, I always go back to 2005, 2006. I was talking to a CEO of a 35,000 person company, and we were talking about contact center. And I asked, how many agents are you looking for? And he says, how many can you support? I said, we can support a lot. He says, I'd like to have 35,000 agents. And I've always remembered that concept. And quite frankly, if I was a CEO, I would want to monitor every customer interaction. And let me tell you, I think it's coming. I personally think it's coming. By the way, has anybody been to a Taco Bell lately? Anybody been to a Taco Bell lately? Go into Taco Bell and you'll see a sign on the counter, and it says, warning, audio monitoring in process. That means they put microphones in the Taco Bell to hear what's going on. If I put an array of microphones above the checkout counter in a Taco Bell, I can use spatial positioning to identify the location of specific speakers and voices in an oral space. If I know one of them's behind the counter and I can associate the person on the other side and I can isolate the voice streams, I now have a conversation with someone doing a checkout in a Taco Bell and the customer on the other side. And I can apply all the analytics to that we have in the contact center to that interaction. By the way, let me tell you how I think how Home Depot works in 5 years.
Can I ask you though, are we also letting people know that that's being done?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if I went to a Taco Bell today, you're telling me I'd walk up to it and say, by the way, your conversations are being recorded and analyzed?
It's already there on the wall. It doesn't tell you it's being analyzed, it tells you it's being recorded.
Okay, it does tell you it's
being recorded. And it may say underneath, so all that does is that sign that says audio, and it doesn't say it's recording. I think it says audio something. It says now may be analyzed for customer satisfaction, just like the same message you get at the beginning of everything. I mean, by the way, apply the same thing in your supermarket. Apply the same thing, by the way, right now. Going to apply the same thing in 5 years to your Home Depot. So in 5 years, your Home Depot is going to have a camera on every aisle. That camera is going to be connected to AI in the cloud. and it's going to be watching who's in the aisle. It's going to know who's a customer. It's going to know who's an employee, because the employees are wearing vests and it can be easily identified, and they can be identified with facial recognition. So you happen to be stopped in front of the plumbing and you're picking up these PVC pipes, trying to understand how to do a plumbing project. And you've stood there for 3 minutes looking at pipes, and the AI says, whoa, I have a customer who spent 3 minutes and is obviously looking at parts in a specific area. Maybe that customer needs help. So it now sends a message to the 4 plumbing knowledgeable employees and says, is anybody available to go to aisle 3 and talk to somebody?
Yeah.
There's
now-
the key thing, is anybody available? Sorry, that has
Did you hear my words earlier? Did you hear what I said earlier about gamification?
Yeah.
So that's how you do it. You tell everybody you need to respond to at least 10 of these a week, or you don't get a good performance rating. If you're that engineer, you need to spend 10 to 15% of your year interacting with customers. If you don't do that, so I used to, when I was a manager, one of the things I was told was it's really important to have SEs write technical articles. So I told all my SEs, if you have to write 3 articles a year, you lose 1 grade on your rating for every article you don't want. So if you're an excellent employee and you don't write an article, you go down 1, don't write another. So you can be a poor employee no matter how good you are if you don't write 3 articles.
So let me just pause right there, because we're 10 minutes over and I'm actually 5 minutes late for another meeting.
Sorry.
No, that's okay, Phil. I know. No, Phil, but we have to have you back. I'll sidebar with you after this. And maybe we'll just, again, continue with an open forum, and we'll talk about, next steps with you. But I think this was great. I'm overwhelmed with information, which is awesome. And you gave us new perspectives on continuing to expand our practices, because I think this is right on point, along with cloud movement. That's what I'm seeing as well, Phil. The complexity, getting removed, if you will, by the cloud. Yeah, I'm seeing that too. So thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you again next time. Phil, again, thanks for all your time today. It was great.
Thanks everyone. It was great. It was great. It was great seeing everyone again. I haven't seen you guys in a while.
Yeah, you should have been with us last week. It was amazing.
I would have liked to have been, but oh well.
We'll forgive you this time. Hey guys, take care. Cheers from Minnesota.